Hey, welcome to Scott Binnie from Zuzubuzz Digital. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great, Greg. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's the heat wave is broken, which is nice for me. So I'm not a fan of 32-degree weather. If you like that, that's good. But I prefer slightly cooler. So I'm happy to be here in the cooler weather.
I suppose I don't mind the hot weather. There's always beer.
Yeah, fair enough. And to each their own. I don't control the weather. I just talk
As
about
long
it.
as you control the beer, you're good.
Yeah, and we haven't done startup drinks in a long time, and I don't know if you ever got out to one of our startup
I haven't been
drinks.
to one yet. I was
Yeah,
actually planning on coming.
yeah, last one was March 11th, but with COVID, we'll see when people will be interested in doing something like that again. I'm kind of thinking January, but who knows? Maybe sooner, maybe not.
Yeah, no, a lot of companies aren't telling their employees that. Well, they're telling their employees that don't bother thinking about coming back until after January at least.
Yeah, and so we're seeing these opening up, and I think whatever the new normal is, I hate that phrase, but we'll have a better idea. Ideally, in December, January, are people getting together? Yes, but in smaller groups. How are bars and restaurants social distancing properly? Do I do some event like this at a partner with a bar, or do I partner with a co-working space, or I have to do something else? Because everyone's going to be conscious about bringing all people in and being around so many people.
Hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, with that, Scott, we're talking about PESTLE today, but I was asking about the spelling and whatnot, and now it's PESTLE with an extra E. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, it's a moving target, right? These things they're just acronyms. So as soon as somebody says, "Well, times have changed. We got to add this," then somebody's got to figure out how to add it to the acronym so you can still pronounce it. Um, so pestle with an E, with another E, the third E. The third E is for ethics, because this day and age, ethics are important. Ethics are very important. Corporate ethics are extremely important in the whole marketing process. Uh, with social media, if you screw up as a company ethically, it's all over the place, and it's not like 20 years ago where you sort of maybe take care of it and brush it under the rug. That doesn't happen anymore. So there are a
Yeah,
lot of different ethical factors that you have to take into consideration when you're whatever you're doing. If you're moving into a country, it used to be the only thing you had to worry about was was the company name or was the product name a bad word in that language. Well, now it's not at all like that. Now you've got to take a whole pile of stuff into consideration.
yeah, and more and more so with the movements that are happening right now, people want to know where you stand
Yeah.
as a business before they work with you. So you need to these days at least show people where you are with all the stuff that's going on. Like I don't want to get into it because
It's
uh,
just a big rabbit hole.
yeah, but all I can say is that the world needs more empathy these days, and that we all need to sympathize and empathize with each other, and hope that that we come to a better place at the end of this.
Yeah, well, I'll hope there is a better place at the end of this. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And on that darker note, why don't you get your presentation ready and I'll welcome everybody and say we want to answer your questions today. We like to make this as interactive as possible. Scott's going to be going through his presentation and I'll be jumping in here and there. If you have questions, throw them in the chat room, throw them in the Q&A room. I'll get to them either while we're talking about it when it makes sense or at the end. And we'll go from there. So, Scott, where do we start?
Okay, we start here. How's that?
Looks good.
Looks good.
Yep.
Okay, this is the French version, PESTELE analysis. It's another strategic planning tool, much like, well, similar to SWOT, which we talked about last week. Um, it's another sort of framework. It's a little bit in flux because whereas SWOT takes care of your sort of your internal strengths and weaknesses and how you internally deal with um, competition, threats, and opportunities provided by the marketplace. PESTLE is more about the macro, the external stuff. A little bit about me, if you don't know anything about me, I'm 45 or 45 years. I'm 45. That would be nice. I'm 45 years as an entrepreneur. I've done a whole pile of crap. Some's been really good, and some has been really good. Because I've done such a lot of things over the years, I've found that being an entrepreneur and being a founder at anything, it's really important for you to learn how to run a business. Most entrepreneurs, believe it or not, are really good at what they do. Almost everyone is. The problem is that most of them do not know how to run a business or grow a business. And that's, I think, probably one of the major reasons why 95% of them fail. In any case, let's get at it. What you should learn today, what a PESTLE analysis is, when you should use it, what's it good for, and how to start creating a solid base for your business, because you have to know this information before you actually do start your business. So why use PESTLE? Again, I said it's a macro environmental influence that are affecting the business. It helps you identify limitations, regulations, and attitudes. For instance, if you're going into the U.S., how does the new trade deal affect you? Okay, these are certain things that you have to think about. If you're online, if you're selling online, who knows where you're selling? You have to take that into consideration. So you have to focus on the external factors and things that you can't influence. I mean, nobody's going to tell Trump whether or not to drop his trade war with China. So, you've got nothing you can do about it. So here it is, a PESTLE analysis, a framework tool used to analyze and monitor the macro environmental factors that have a profound impact on organizations or on a campaign, like a marketing campaign's performance. Especially useful in starting a new business or entering a new foreign market. It's not exclusive to that, but that's generally when it uses. And here it is. What does PESTLE stand for? These are all the different factors that go into the analysis. So you've got your political factors, economic, social, technological, environmental, which probably should be termed ecological because these are all different environments, legal, and as we just discussed, ethical. So let's go through each one of those. Political environmental factors are things that you have to take into account. And in this presentation, I'm providing a fair number of the factors. There are lists of hundreds of factors out there if you really want to dive deep into doing PESTLE analysis. But governmental controls and influences industry and economies through legislation and economic policies. So it's not actually the rules and regulations that you're looking at here. You're looking at how is the government influencing things. You're looking at things, again, I'll use the US as an example because most people are fairly up to speed on what's going on there. But things like trade restrictions, well, there's the war with China and Mexico and Canada and Europe and everywhere else. Conflicts, look at the problems that they're having right now socially in the US. And look at the effects that something like COVID is having on their economy. How are their fiscal policies working with it? And is it an inclusive environment for you to step into as a marketplace? Is the politics stable? What sort of corruption is it? Has their foreign trade policy changed, or is it changing? How does their tax policy affect what you're going to do? If you're opening a plant in another country, then obviously you've got a whole range of different factors to bring into it. But even in terms of just selling something online? What are the tax implications, and how are they different from country to country? Do some countries demand that they get something? Who knows? Um, so also, in terms of making the laws, like environmental laws, or tearing them down in some cases, um, the education system is generally a governmental uh, authority, and it's controlled to a certain extent by people who are elected into governmental positions. So who are these people? What are they doing? Are they positive in the school system? Are they trying to make cuts? Uh, is the student base of the country, or the ability of the students in the country to go on to higher learning, is that increasing or decreasing? What sort of infrastructure does the country have to support all these things, including your business? And of course, health regulations. You don't really want to go into a place where there's a pandemic that's active. So, these are all considerations to take into it. Now, here are some places, on each one of these, there are places where you can actually get more information. And if Craig has your email, I'll send out a copy of this deck to everyone afterwards. But these are places where you can actually get a lot of this information.
Yeah, I'll share the emails of everyone here. And we got a question in the chat room, but before I get to that, like I've never seen a time where all these factors were in so much flux as right now. Have you?
Personally, no. Historically, probably, again,
Historically, maybe.
no, historically, I think sort of around the time of the Industrial Revolution. And I think that this is very similar to that.
And so with all of these things changing, some of these will affect your business. It doesn't really matter what business you're in, right? When we're talking about labor laws and tax policies and infrastructure and health regulations, trade restrictions, there's so many things. We talk about corruption. Well, if we talk about Trudeau, there's so much going on with that government these days that scandal here, scandal there. And then if you're looking at the U.S., their elections are happening, so political stability, and it seems like they have completely different points of view as to policy. So if the Democrats get elected, a lot of this stuff will go completely different than what it currently is today. So keeping an eye on these is really make sure, one, you don't get burned is important, but two, to take advantage of these things before they happen. Do you have any thoughts on that, Scott?
Well, yeah. Anytime there is a situation where there's a problem, there's always an opportunity. The thing is, are you in the mindset to figure that out, and are you in a position to take advantage of it?
Yeah, having the right mindset is key.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of a lot of these things, it's to a degree. I mean, you can look at corruption in a place like Mexico, and then you can look at corruption in a place like Russia. Two entirely different leagues.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
it may be something that's going to affect you. It may not be something that's going to affect you. And you can look at all these things and say, well, these all affect us even now here in Canada, which is a reasonably stable environment. What happens if you're in Nairobi? What happens to Henry and Ghana?
Yeah.
Where you've got the cultural differences are also different. Plus, you've got authoritarian rulers all over the place, all with their little fiefdoms. How do you deal with that? And that comes into big play actually in the mining industry, because there's a lot of mining that goes on in Africa, and they got to deal with this stuff every day.
Yeah.
So
We have yeah.
Sorry.
We have a question here about have you seen political views and business ideas clashing? And I'm going to say yes, but Scott, how about you? And what do you do when political views, I guess I assume, clash with your business?
Well, it depends on whether they're just views or whether they're regulations. It really determines on the situation. I mean, you look at the U.S. right now. Okay, maybe right now the U.S. is not conducive to you selling whatever you want to sell into their marketplace because of what's going on. Um, if it switches on November 3rd, then all of a sudden you're in like Flint. So it really depends on what the situation is, how soon it is. So I mean, if you think that the Democrats are going to win, which most people I think at this point do, uh, then you look at that as an opportunity and say, okay, how can I be prepared to take that opportunity? If that market is going to open up to me, I got to be ready to go in
Yeah,
at
and
the
that
beginning.
yeah, that's exactly it. So, if the corruption scandal means that there's going to be more diligence and certification for government contracts, you could be the first one to be transparent and certified to be applying for those government contracts when you see it happen. That's why I mentioned corruption is okay. Things are going to change. If you're doing that, maybe you can jump on that bandwagon and be ahead of it. Um, I think COVID's killing the fax machine. And so things that were diametrically opposed, where you had to physically sign stuff, legal documents in person, have changed overnight. Where real estate agents and whatnot were send faxes back and forth, all of that's becoming online digital, and being able to sign your will digitally has changed. So when I know some businesses where they were trying to get this stuff changed for months ahead of time, but all of a sudden people and governments are willing to move because of the new situation. So it depends, you're right, on the situation you're in and if you can influence that change, because sometimes you need to get involved with the government at a government level if they have opposing views to change them.
Yeah. Um, Understanding, of course, that you have to be able to negotiate. Um, it's very difficult sometimes to negotiate logic versus politics, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, governments are at least 40% run by politics.
All right,
Quite often, a lot more.
I'll let you keep going because we're only on the P in
Yeah.
Pestle.
Okay. Um, Economic environmental factors. Okay. Now, these are things that can change your demand and supply model in another environment. Uh, and also, the environmental factors can change the purchasing power of consumers. And this, again, you find in a lot of um, dictatorships where the money all of a sudden starts to funnel up to the top, and the divide between the top 1% and everybody else becomes absolutely humongous. And I look at specifically a country like Iran, which, for those of us sort of my age, we may remember when Iran was a very rich country, was an ally of the United States, and was just expanding like you wouldn't believe. And then they had the revolution with Khomeini, and now more than half the population is trying to figure out how to get out of it. And it's because they just don't have they can't buy anything. The Venezuela's gone through the same thing recently. There's just you can't buy anything because it's like the old pictures of the Weimar Republic in the 1930s where you're going up to a sandwich shop with a wheelbarrow full of money. So you got to be careful with it. So what these economic environmental factors are, generally speaking, you can judge them from the inflation rate, what type of disposable income it has, sort of the how the how the income split is divided up in the population, what the unemployment rate is, and that can also be masked sometimes by more than just people lying about numbers. You have to sometimes with unemployment dig in and find out where is the unemployment, what's the demographic of the unemployment. If it's all young people up to age 30, then what's going on with the country? Because and if it's nobody over the age of 50, then you got to say, well, where'd they go? So things that affect your decisions. whether there are high interest rates or low interest rates. Because countries obviously change their own internal interest rates in order to be able to try and balance their currency against the world leaders like the US dollar. And also finding out foreign exchange rate. Well, that I guess ties into foreign exchange rates and also the economic growth patterns. In almost every country or every region of the world, you can find statistics that will show graphically what the how the companies or how the countries or regions grew in terms of what was their GDP, what was their total export for the year, things like this. These are numbers that are easily graphed, and you can find graphs for them, and so you can see whether the country or whether the area is going up or down or just sort of laying flat. S stands for social environmental factors, and these are basically, it's a sort of social or socio-cultural, really, because a lot of it has to do with culture. What these again are just some of the things that you have to look at. Career attitudes. You know, how do people feel about working? Is everybody a 9-to-5er and then they're out of there and partying for the rest of the night, or is there like a big founders community? Is there a big entrepreneurial community? Are there some great large corporations that are doing a lot of good in the area? What's the safety like? Is there a safety record problem? Again, if you get into things like mining or into some areas of manufacturing, you've got to be very careful of that. Health consciousness, that sort of goes without saying. Lifestyle opinions and attitudes. The culture of every country is different. The culture of every people is different. And if you don't understand the culture and don't take time to learn about the culture, you can get yourself into some serious hot water very quickly, and where you can go in with all the greatest enthusiasm in the world. And if you screw up the way that you're introducing yourself to everybody, all of a sudden you've got a company that's not making any money and won't, because everybody thinks that you've insulted them. These are cultural values and social values that you have to take into consideration. The amount of nationalism in the country. You know, you look at, I always admired the States for the amount of nationalism they have, even when they're not being run by a nationalist party. You know, it's just that it's very odd to see people who are just so proud of their flag, even though it's just a piece of cloth. And you can compare that against almost any other country in the world, and it's just not the same. But there are other countries that look at nationalism as from a political perspective instead of as a pride perspective. And those are the countries you have to watch out for, because those are the countries who, if you all of a sudden start making a lot of money, they're going to take over your business. So you got to be careful. What sort of influence does the media have? Some countries, there's not much influence from the media, specifically countries like China, North Korea, Russia, sort of the usual characters, or the usual suspects, I guess, because their media is all controlled by the government. If you have an independent media and you have a well-respected independent media, then it's a great source of information. The U.S. has a number of different media outlets that have been internationally known for decades and decades. You know, if you're getting your information from the New York Times or Washington Post or from CNN or any of the old major TV networks, you know, you're getting news. You're not getting editorial all the time. There are other carriers out there where news is sort of secondary to the entertainment. So other things you look at, the priorities in education, again, population growth rate and age distribution and income distribution. Now, again, these are all just some of them. Here, if you notice in the where you can find the answers to this stuff, I threw in a couple of extra ones with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs and Gartner Insights. Gartner is, you know, depending on whether you want to use the free stuff or the paid stuff, they got an amazing amount of information. Next on the board is the technological innovations that can have a direct or indirect influence on the industry and the prospects of the company, such as, and patents you would think are legal, but they're actually technical because of what they do. Licensing considerations, communication considerations, even things like, what's the Wi-Fi like? What's the internet like in the country? You go to South Korea, and every single person in South Korea has like the highest, fastest Wi-Fi that you can actually get. They're like ahead of everybody else in the world. And then you go to Arnprior or Renfrew in Ontario, and you're lucky to get dial-up. So you got to know where it is that you're going. And there are lots of stories over time of people buying great tracts of land to build huge things and finding out that the technological services just weren't there to support it. And what do you do with it? Well, it's called the white elephant. Other things, what's the IT industry like where you're going? Tech obsolescence is really something you have to deal with more in terms of third world countries and things like that, where a lot of their technology may have been donated at one point and may have been donated sort of just to clear out stocks and secondhand models. And so although you may be used to working at high speed, where you're going, there just may not be the speed there for you to go. So you also have to take into consideration. I hate phones sometimes. Now that everybody knows I have a Samsung. Information technology, tech obsolescence, how obviously is the stuff. How aware is the area of technological innovation? I'm thinking the first one that comes to mind for me actually is down east, Canada, Nova Scotia. It is starting to become a tech hub. And if you look at the cost right now of living in Nova Scotia, the cost of buying a house, which is $40,000-$50,000, maybe that's a place you want to consider. But if you're going to, if you're starting up a small local startup, probably don't try and rent space in the Bank Montreal Tower. It doesn't make sense, even though all the technical stuff is there. The awareness of what you're doing is not. So how much automation is there, and sort of also what's the development side like? What's the founder game like in the country? Are there new companies being founded? Are there new technologies in the area being explored? Because you want to see how creative the place is as well. Any questions at this point?
Well, we don't have any questions right now, but I wanted to mention, technological factors. I was just reading, the iPhone 12 will be 5G as an example. So when are we going to, as a society or wherever your target audience is, going to embrace that? And can you take advantage of it and be a leader using whatever that happens to be?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, if you look at also how things spring up around things. I mean, you look at how much innovation sprung up around University of Waterloo over the past 34 years, because they were like one of the top computing places in the continent, really.
Yep.
And so Waterloo became quite a hub for industries. It turned out companies like, whatchamacallit, the phone company.
AT&T?
No, the Canadian cell company.
Wind?
Oh, no, I can't remember what it is now. Old one, but anyway. Now it's just doing software. But there are a lot of companies that came out of that. And
BlackBerry.
Thank you. RIM.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of it. The same thing happened in Ottawa. And Ottawa is a great tech center. In the 80s, Ottawa was very, very big on B2C tech. Places like Corel.
Yep.
So I think these are ecological or economic environment factors that you have to deal with. Now, in terms of ecology, I was watching a show last week that was talking about a tidal wave and the fact that the tidal wave, or tsunami, I guess, had come in and wiped out the old pirate capital in Jamaica. And what had happened was that the whole place was built on sand. And as the tsunami, as the earth shook and the tsunami came in, the sand all turned to mud, and all the houses literally sank into it. It is just astonishing what happened. And they ended up excavating it. They found a ship in the middle of the town square. It just got completely wiped out. Similar, actually, what happened to Galveston about 100 years ago. These are all ecological factors that you have to take into consideration. You may not know all of them, but you have to do your best due diligence to find out if there are factors that are going to affect what you're doing in terms of the geography itself. If you're going to go into a place like Brazil, it's got a big population, big market base, fairly tightly controlled around the coast. So I mean, it could be potentially a great market for somebody. But with the climate that's going down there, and with the rainforest coming up, the amount of smoke that they've got, and the pollution that they've got, and add on to that medical factors such as COVID and political factors that are happening, even though it's always been considered a fairly stable environment. Right now, I would not suggest Brazil is a good place to go because of all of these factors. So you also have to take into account the stakeholder and the consumer values in terms of the ecology. If you can't, like, if you're in Pennsylvania and you're digging for coal, and that's what the company does, or if you're out west or somewhere and you're digging for or drilling for oil, people understand that there is a risk of dirt, of things happening and environmental things going wrong. But some companies and some governments get involved with this, and all of a sudden, if something happens and you're the cause of it, that can actually put you out of business with the potential loss that you might have for other people. So you've got to be careful of that. Environmental offsets, whether or not there are offsetting environmental conditions, whether or not you can purchase carbon and things like that, so that you can work there, whether you have to or not. Is the weather conducive to what you want to do? And by conducive, I mean not only to the product and the service. Is the weather conducive to the type of employees that you want to have, to the type of plant that you want to have? Is it conducive to the type of office you want to have? Is it the sort of place that you want to work? And then of course there's global climate change, and if you're too close to the sea and very flat land, I'd suggest you move up a bit. Again, there are some links there for places you can get more information on this stuff. Second last one, legal. These all have to do with the laws. I mean, before we talked about political, where people actually, governments actually make the laws. It really has to do with what the laws are and how they were enforced. How are the regulations of those laws enforced? And these are just a number of the things that you have to look at in terms of discrimination. Well, the Me Too movement is big in North America and Western Europe. I don't think they've probably heard of it in China. I don't think they've heard of it in Russia. I don't think they've heard of it in most of Africa. It's a cultural thing, but it's also a legal environment. Because of what's happening here, you could have some unscrupulous people doing unscrupulous things in other places that you have to look out for. Antitrust laws. Now, of course, the U.S. and China are embroiled in one of those wars right now. Employment laws. Employment laws are important not only for the conditions that people work in, but what hours they work, what sort of holidays they provide, what sort of governmental plans that have to be supported by the company, whether it's here with CPP and UIC and stuff like that. Is it different in other countries, or where you're going? What sort of copyright and patent laws are in place? Now, a lot of copyright is sort of generic. Patents are different, though, country to country. And quite often, even though you've got a patent in one country, you got to go get it in another country in order for it to be valid there. Health and safety laws, a lot of countries don't have them. Simple as that. You know, you put up the building. If it falls down, well, just rebuild it. And that's it. And also industry-specific regulations. There are a lot of industries, obviously, that are regulated. And every country, every region regulates them differently. If you are selling booze on a delivery system, there are some places in Canada that they'll allow you to do that. Some places they won't. There's some places in Canada you can sell cannabis by mail. Some places you can't. Even though you can sell to the whole country pretty well. You know, there's these regulations. You got to know where you're going, where you are, because these things can change. And then the final one, which is the new one, ethical environmental factors. And this is a definition, an Oxford definition of ethics. A set of moral principles and values that govern the actions and decisions of an individual or group. Okay, how does that affect you? It affects you in terms of your sales and advertising practices, whether you actually lie in your advertising, whether you try and screw people when you're selling. It affects you know, the accounting, management, and marketing standards that you decide are part of the company. And most of this also, if you think about it from a marketing perspective, all of this stuff has to also be reflected by your branding, and it's got to be reflected in your core values. And those core values and branding then have to also match up with your customer. So you've got to be thinking about all of these different things when you're coming up with your branding. How do you want the company perceived? You know, and unfortunately these days, perception is reality. And so in order to get your company perceived the way you want, you have to understand all of these different factors. What are your attitudes towards intellectual property in terms of patents? And, you know, are you willing to break patents to do something? You know, how far are you willing to go? Your recruitment process. If you're not here, if you're in another country, I mean, there are some countries where they still recruit people by driving them off the streets. I wouldn't suggest that that's the way that you want to do your business, but you know, it happens. And if you hire a general manager looking after an office in some place, and that's the way they're used to operating, then don't be surprised if that's what they do. So you've got to make sure that you know about these things. What are your attitudes about employment standards? Do you think people should be paid fairly? Do you think, you know, people should be rewarded for work? Do you think, you know, how do you want to work with people? Are you going to be domineering, or are you going to be a coach or a team member? You know, you have to think about all these things, and also how that is affected by the culture of where it is you want to set up. If you're ethically set up that, no, everything is 100% up and up by the books, we give everybody lots of pay, they got good salary, good benefits, great benefits, and all of that sort of stuff. And you go into a country that doesn't have any of that, first of all, you're going to have a hard time doing that and creating a cohesive unit within your own company. But second of all, if you bring that in, then you're going to be resented by a lot of other people in that country. On the other hand, if you don't have that and you go into a place like Sweden, guess what? You've got to have that, or else you're just not going to be able to hire anyone. So these are all things that you have to take into consideration. Again, some places to get more information on it. Now, PESTLE itself is really only part of the picture. It's just like a piece of the puzzle with the other analyses, tools, frameworks, etc., that we use, like SWOT. It could be used part of almost any business-related decision, really, because everything that you think of always has something to do with something outside that you can't influence. And that's really what PESTLE is determining what those factors are and whether or not you can live with them. On that note, anybody wants to talk to me about it, here you go. Any questions?
Yeah. The first one we had here was Uber started without sorting out the legal part, and they won that after. Is
Sorry?
that the thought here is the question here is Uber started without sorting out the legal part, and then they fought that after. Um, you know, is that something? Well, obviously, they made that decision, but um, why do you think they made that decision? If we're looking at the PESTLE situation.
Yeah. And well, there are really two ways of looking at it. I guess from the investor's perspective and VC's perspective, you're looking at it saying, without, we don't have to do the legal in order to maintain our exit strategy. And so from their perspective, and I mean, they're the ones who are effectively owning a lot of the company, um, it's not important. However, from the as one of the founders of Google, I think I would have stuck up for doing the legal analysis too and getting that stuff done, because look at how much it's costing.
Yeah, and I one of their so they started out. Here's the thing: it started out as ride sharing, right? Like,
Yeah.
Uber is not ride sharing. Let's face it. You know, you're not. I'm not on my way to the store, and hey, you happen to be along the way, and you want to go to the store too. Sure, I'll stop and pick you up, and you'll give me 50 cents or a couple of bucks. It's I'm driving around looking for. So they started with idea validation. Hey, we're going to displace taxi, but let's start with validating whether people just take rides from strangers, and we'll call it ride sharing. And so what they did once they got investment, that's when they decided to sort it out legally. So once they had a growth strategy and they had investment, they said, you know what, we're just going to go in these markets because the current situation, like the $1 million or taxi medallions in New York or whatever they were costing, what wasn't attainable for them. It was cheaper for them to do this legally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting. Like, I mean, they're looking at the environment, the business, and they say, this is all wrong in today's society. We're going to challenge it. And, instead of paying millions of dollars for our drivers to be on the street, we'll pay millions of dollars to justify our existence in court when they challenge us.
Yeah, I guess. It's obviously it's a strategic decision.
Yeah.
The only downside I see from it is that it has it has a potential. Um, it's got it could have public relations fiasco written all over it if it's not done right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if before they got it straightened out, something could have happened that could have shut down the company.
Absolutely, lots of things could have happened, and they've been ordered not to do. I thought in California or somewhere recently. I don't know how that's going to go over. So they're still fighting it. So long term, we'll see. What whether it's a good strategy for them, but looks like the strategy they decided to take at some point, looking at the legal situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's funny because I don't think it. I mean, if you think about the amount, the millions that they spend doing that, I don't know how much it would have actually cost to figure out the legalities to begin with.
Yeah, and I think the situation is they wanted to do different business model and not be subject to the same rules. We don't own cars, we don't do this, we don't do that. We're just a dispatch service. So
Right. We have no liabilities. We just make cash.
Yeah, and that goes back to the ethical side of the stuff at the end.
Yeah.
And we've seen a few things from them as a company, right? We've seen the parties and the where everyone's sitting around following stars as they're taking their Uber home from whatever late night escapade they've had, and politicians and whatnot. And we've seen those. So it's part of the culture of the company because that's what happens.
Yeah.
When
I
you
wonder
start with
how many of those guys, those drivers down in LA, actually have contacts with Inquirer photographers.
Well, my guess is
Most.
the ones that hustle absolutely do because
Yeah,
they're in it to make money, right?
that's it.
It's a business, like anything else. It's funny. I was talking to Mark Evans the other day, and I saw he was posted something about a podcast about why are you on LinkedIn? Is it to network, community, or is it to make money? So but if you're running a business, you're running it to make money. If you're working, you're doing it usually to make money. So that is definitely the situation. So let me ask you a question about. I work with a company that was building an ethical marketplace where you could shop based on the impact you wanted to have on the world. Um, and where would that fit in? Some of that impact is climate related. Clean wells, clean water, planting trees. Some of that might be education related. Some of that might be only vegan products versus I don't know because there's so many different options where you
Yeah.
can choose. Where would that line up?
What do you mean by line up? I mean, I could see, obviously using PESTLE to make, I mean, just to go through all of the analysis to make sure that with PESTLE or SWOT, really, it doesn't matter what the company does. And this is one of the things that they like to teach at some of the business schools. What the company does is irrelevant. The product is irrelevant. The service is irrelevant. It's how or how you fix a customer's pain is all that it comes down to. So no matter what it is that you do, you apply these factors to it to find out whether or not, in conjunction with other tools, you feel this is a good idea. Whether or not you're validating what it does within the market that you've selected.
Yeah, I guess my question was very misleading when I said where does it line up. When we I guess when my question should have been when we talk about ethics,
Right.
are we talking about the ethics of the business, or are we talking about the ethics of our clients, or what are we talking about?
Yes.
Both. Yes. Okay.
And
So
ethics of the people and the area in which the market in which you want to get into.
yeah. So back to the ethical marketplace. So you're trying to understand my clients and my clients' mindset and what they want to the impact they want to have and what they're feeling ethically, and how do I match it to them to give them a value proposition that takes them away from Amazon and gets them shopping with me. So that's why I was looking for the ethical analysis pieces of that particular side of the equation.
Yeah, you can differentiate yourself with ethics, but
Absolutely.
you can also you have to make sure that wherever you go, the marketplace is in sync ethically with what you're providing. You're not going to go down to Wall Street and start, selling people pieces of live trees to replant in their offices. But at the
Yeah.
same time, the people down there, if you say, hey, this industry looks good. Oh, I hear that this company has an interesting story. That's all you say, and somebody takes it a different way as a code, and they're not making money with it. Is that ethical? No. Is it done all the time?
Yeah.
But it's a different industry.
Absolutely. So we have another question here. Ethical equal pay is a big debate, and a lot of companies are talking about it, but not doing it. I don't know specifically what this relates to Pestle for, unless you put that out there as your company slogan, equal pay. And I think it's hard for a company that's been around for a significant period of time just all of a sudden to adjust everybody's pay. If you're starting new, it's okay. Um, but yeah, a lot of companies are talking about it, but not many are standing up and doing anything about it. I guess they try to stand up on different ethical grounds when the customers look at them. that's kind of a question towards you, Scott, because you have
Yeah,
to have a
yeah. Equal work for equal value is, I mean, as a concept, it's logical, it's moral, it's ethical. From a business perspective, because of history, it's expensive.
history is expensive, absolutely. And let me give you an example where I used to work in Mexico, and so the people on the plant floor, the people working in the factories of the place where I worked at in Mexico, they were making about 75 cents an hour. So they would end up being about 20 US dollars a week, is what their take home. Now, people were getting mugged on the way home for that money, and people would be wounded so that someone else could come and take their job. If you went into that environment and said, we're going to pay you the same as we pay our U.S. workers immediately, there would be such a disruption in the economy and the environment and everything going on that the negative impact would be unbelievable. However, what we companies do as a practice now is go in and pay the littlest amount of possible in the place isn't ethical either. So it's hard to walk that fine line. Like you said, history is expensive.
Yeah, and the fact that you know the the payment structure for most large existing companies, it, pay is their number one expense for the most part.
Yep.
And so if you're taking your number one expense and you're taking 55, 60% of your workforce, and you say, okay, they're all going to get a 15% increase, then your shareholders would order the immediate removal of the board of directors.
Yeah, and then from a performance management point of view, like here we got forget about countries. What about same country, payment, gender, race? Okay, we're gonna get just briefly to that and how it affects PESTLE, but um, uh, now okay, I've been a manager. I've managed hundreds of employees at a time. It's review time. Okay, let's assume in this situation everybody started at the same number, $50,000. I got 100 employees. It's review time. The company says you only get 3% total overall bonus to hand out. So, do I give everybody a 3% raise, or do I give my superstars, 4 or 5% raise and take a little bit off the people who aren't performing? When you start doing a distribution message to say, this guy's working 60, 70 hours a week, he deserves a little bit more money. This guy keeps sleeping at his desk and he's not actually doing the work, he deserves a little less. How do you do that year after year and still keep pay equity? I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than people think. But the
Actually,
bands. Go ahead, Scott.
well, in that situation, it depends on how creative you are. Because what you do is you give everybody 2%, and then the balance is left over as bonuses, performance bonuses.
Yeah, that became a whole like where I'm talking working for big corporations. That becomes really hard. But I agree with you, Artie, that this is an issue. Payment by gender and race. So the thing we do, and the thing we're looking at PESTLE is as a consumer, do you want to support businesses who do that? And that's their choice from an ethical place. That's where they stand. So you can call them out and start going to companies who do promote equal pay for gender, race, all that kind of stuff. So I don't really want to get into that specific thing, but this is exactly the point. Is this is the company's chosen way. You have and your perception is that they don't do these things, so you should go somewhere else and do support a company that is more aligned with you. And that's exactly how you're losing your customers or gaining customers based on your ethics. And how long should you take to do a PESTLE analysis and to maintain your analysis? If it takes a long time for me, but wanted to ask the panelists how long it takes for them. Okay, sorry. How long does it take to do a PESTLE?
Uh, it's an ongoing thing. It's living, breathing on its own. The you can stop whenever you want and call it a snapshot in time, but you're always going to learn more, especially if you're actively out there trying to find more. No one's ever going to know everything. So it depends on how far you want to go. And my general rule of thumb is far enough that an angel investor or VC will say that you've done a good job.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, one last time, where can people go to find you if they want to talk to you and find out more?
Easiest thing to do is to check my calendar, but I on my email all day long, and I'm around.
So yeah, all the contact information on the screen, his phone number, calendar to book appointment, email. Appreciate you taking the time today, Scott. And thank you everyone for joining us and going through this. I appreciate the questions. And we'll see you all, some of you hopefully at 2 p.m. Take care.
All right, cheers.